I took a course in number theory, which is not the sort of thing you would ever take in high school or even early in college or at any other time. And what was really interesting about that is a lot of the questions were open-ended, and we're tackling some things that hadn't been solved.
I took a number theory class in college, and I remember the first exam had prove division as one of the questions. I was like, what? Wait, this is a fascinating class.
Did you end up proving division?
Yeah. He had hinted at it. I remember one of the lectures, he sort of talked about, you know, you hear that and you panic, like, what? How do you prove something? It's like, how do I prove this tablecloth is white? I mean, it seems so fundamental. But no, he was good at lecturing and saying, break it down into steps. First, you show that there's this thing called subtraction and that you can repeat it over and over and over. And it's not very far before you get to division. Who's next?
So I was just wondering, when you were younger, was there a job that you really wanted to have and you really thought you were going to have?
You know, I think off and on I always said I wanted to be a doctor, and then I would say, well, no, I want to do something else, and then it would sort of come back around to that. I think, you know, when I was really little, my mom described, my grandfather was a doctor in Raleigh, and they were playing a game where they would pretend to call, and I would answer the phone, and they would ask, I mean, it's like a toy phone, and apparently at some point I said, take 2 aspirin and don't call here anymore, and hung up the phone. But I think, yeah, I just really enjoy having relationships with my patients, and then also enjoy the research side of thinking up questions and having my patients bring me questions, figuring out how to solve them, and then bringing that back. So I love what I do.
So I must have watched too many science fiction movies or something, because at some point I decided I really want to be a genetic engineer. And of course this was back in the 1980s, and it was totally science fiction and totally unrealistic, and that wasn't going to be a career. And now I'm looking at what I do now, and it's kind of ironic because I'm actually engaged in the business of genetic engineering. Not for nefarious purposes, you know, like the kind of stuff you see in movies, but to improve people's health, tweaking genes that are involved in diseases, and actually doing it in such a way that it could treat both common diseases like heart attack and Alzheimer's, as well as rare genetic disorders. So it's kind of funny how those crazy ambitions you have can actually, in a weird way, turn out to happen, because enough time passes that something that you wouldn't even imagine was really possible does become possible. So it's fun.
I was always a fan of astronomy. I remember my dad would take a small telescope and point it up at the moon, and we'd stare at craters, even with binoculars. And so for the longest time, I thought I was just going to go into astronomy. I was a huge fan of Legos, and they had a series of Lego sets, Ice Planet, and another series of like Space Patrol or Space Police that I really liked building. But it wasn't until I think I read an article in Scientific American about propulsion, different propulsion techniques for how humans would travel to the nearest stars, that I started realizing that there's things outside of just staring at stars and with telescopes, that there was an engineering aspect. And so I thought I was going to go into mechanical engineering, and then it was in high school, actually my junior year, that a friend of mine was a senior, was applying for an aerospace engineering program, and I had no such idea that the thing existed. So when I heard that I could do engineering and still have it be focused in the space area, I immediately knew, yep, that's where I'm going.
Looking at your courses and what you wrote on the paper that they gave us, it seems like you would have become a politician or a historian or something like that. So why did you end up becoming a doctor?
So I think that, when I first met Dr. Sawyer, who was the first executive director of TIP, I was totally into math stuff and totally into science, and he said, you know, you should take writing. You should take something you aren't already sure you're really good at, because you want to stretch yourself and learn something different, not skip another year of math so that you have even less courses left to take in high school. And so I took writing. And I've used that every single day.
So what was the most enjoyable aspect of the TIP program for you guys?
Immersion in a group of peers. I think one of the sample questions was, what were you like as a middle school student? And I was terribly awkward. Was not one of the cool kids, and I think middle school is always a challenge for everybody. And a lot of folks are just trying to fit in and not stand out too much. And so a lot of times that can stifle a little bit, or at least intimidate if you're somebody who wants to be intellectually curious. And then when you're immersed in a group of folks who are similarly very gifted, very intelligent, very curious, it allows you to not be different and still explore that. So I think that was the first real exposure, first opportunity I'd had to do that. And I think that was one of the certainly more formative experiences for me.
So this was really my first opportunity where I was surrounded by peers who were very much like me, you know, very smart and not ashamed of being smart. And I think having those interactions with other people like that made us all feel better about being talented and having very lofty goals.
I think I would echo the same themes. I went for 4 summers, and one of the people who went to the same school I went to in New York came the second summer, and I, you know, had been at the same school since kindergarten, and I knew everyone, and everyone knew me, and that's wonderful because everyone knows you. It's also terrible because everyone knows you. And so I came and was making friends and meeting people, and somehow we were in a conversation back at school 6 months later, and Liz looked at us and said, yeah, at TIP, Alison was popular. I was like, there you go. So it was just such a different feeling, and I was always trying to not draw attention to myself, whereas at TIP, it was just fun.
We've got some goodie bags for you guys. You guys want to switch places?
I need another chair.
Okay. Great.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Okay, so I was wondering, for any of you, if in your lifetime, was there something that you want, like you could change, that you want to change?
What would I have changed about myself?
Yeah, like.
So going back in history, if I could have done something differently?
Yes.
That's, I don't know. I think I've been amazingly fortunate with some of the opportunities I've had and the path I've gone down. Maybe I would have paid a little bit more attention in some of my classes. There's definitely areas where I'm stronger in than others that I wish I had paid more attention, because I found that something like you were saying in an earlier interview about how sometimes it's really important to challenge yourself in areas that you're not as interested in, just to see yourself stretched and grow that direction. I think I picked that up a little too late as a lesson.
Yeah, I would second that. I wish I had taken more time during my career to, especially when I had the opportunity, whether it was high school or especially college, to explore interests that I didn't really get a chance to explore because I was so focused on my career path. That tended to be very science, math heavy, and so forth. And I had the opportunities, I just didn't necessarily take advantage of them. And you find that once you've gotten to a certain point, it's really hard to go back and be able to do some of those things, because then you get very, very busy in your career. So I would encourage everyone to think broadly and look at every opportunity as a way to broaden your horizons.
So I think, the things that aren't necessarily right along the path can be really important and interesting. And so I think being gentle on yourselves and not feeling like you have to, graduate in 3 years and then get an MD, PhD in 4, doing it faster doesn't necessarily mean that it's better when you get there. So make sure that you're enjoying the journey.
So were there any clubs that you guys were in middle school or high school?
Academic team in high school. I did, and then math counts in middle school. They were both a lot of fun.
So I was involved in the school newspaper, and I was involved in the school's literary magazine, and the math team, et cetera, et cetera.
So I did speech and debate, which I've already mentioned, which I loved. And I was also involved in the school newspaper. And then I played some sports, and I'm not a natural athlete at all. I'm tall, though, so they liked that. For basketball, they're like, well, you can't really shoot, but you can walk, so we'll take you. But it was actually, I felt like it was really important to know what it was to have something not come easy. And so I really wanted to play volleyball. I was tall, but I was not terribly coordinated. And so I would go to the gym at recess and before school and practice serving and practice playing. I went to a volleyball camp where I got my butt kicked. But it felt good to me to feel like I had earned something, because I think there was a part of me that kind of felt like it wasn't fair that school was so easy for me and that regular assignments just came like that. And so I wanted to, not that learning how to serve the volleyball was somehow going to, translate into that, but it was important to me to know what it was to struggle with something and appreciate that. And so that was something that was really fun and really satisfying when I, was able to actually get on the team and, again, did not get a Division I volleyball scholarship by any stretch, but it was just a really enjoyable thing. So I would encourage you to try to some clubs that speak to your interests and strengths, but also not 50 clubs, but one or two things that you're like, I don't know about this. Let me see.
I have a question. Did any of you ever like procrastinate or not manage your time? How did you deal with that and learn to actually organize your time?
I'm still dealing with it. I'm terribly flawed in that area because I don't have a good solution. I still too easily put off things, too easily distracted. I mean, if there's something particularly laborious, you mentioned writing. I've had to do a lot of documentation and writing, and it just takes forever, and so it's not the most exciting thing for me, and so I tend to put it off longer and longer, in favor of whatever little shiny object is glistening in the corner. But yeah, so I'm probably not the best for advice on that.
Yeah, it's tough, and I'm just thinking right now about the long list of things that.
Yeah. I got one of those too.
Yeah.
And you get a sense of what you're good at and what you're not as good at, and you have to avoid the temptation just to focus on the things that you are good at, because the things that you find are easier to get done quickly, they'll get done quickly, and then the things that you don't find as easy those are the things you tend to procrastinate on. So you have to be really disciplined and just be focused. But it's tough. I would say the one good thing I've found is as I've become more and more advanced in my career, you get a lot more latitude with respect to deadlines. It's very different it's very different from being in school where you have a due date, and if you don't get it in by the due date, then you're in trouble because you'll get marks off or you'll get. Yeah.
I did a mindfulness meditation training program about 6 years ago. I guess in my regrets, I wish I'd done that 20 years earlier. But one of the things that in mindfulness meditation that all the math people around the table will appreciate is that John Kabat-Zinn talks about pain and suffering, and he says pain is a part of daily life, but suffering is optional. And it is like a math equation where suffering equals pain times resistance. So if I'm experiencing pain and I triple my resistance, I triple my suffering. If I'm experiencing pain and I have no resistance, which I've never actually accomplished, but in theory, then there would be no suffering. And I think sometimes when faced with an annoying task, the procrastination is like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this. Oh, it's so awful. I hate it. And the suffering does this, and the task does not change, right? Like, you still have to fill out that form. You still have to, do that vocabulary exercise, whatever. And so if one can just say, okay, I got to do this now. Not going to fight it because it will only increase my suffering. I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to say, why did the teacher assign this? This is so stupid. This is a waste of my, whatever. Like all of that stuff is just noise. And so that sometimes when I'm faced with something irritating, like I hate filling out, our license renewal forms, and I'm like, I'm a good doctor. Why do I have to tell them I haven't been saved? And I'm like, because this is the law. Right? It's not going to change, but I could make it really, really bad. So I think that's really important. And then I think the other thing is that can address the procrastination and the getting behind, and that I'm terrible at, is learning to say no sometimes. And that when somebody asks you to do yet another thing, and you've got 12 different projects, and someone says, wouldn't you like to put in something for the physics Olympiad? In 2 weeks you need to come up with whatever, and you've already got 8 things due, to be able to say, gosh, I would love to, but I am not going to be able to do a good job on this deadline, and so I really probably shouldn't take it on. And then they understand it's not that you're like, no, I'd rather go to the beach. But being willing to do that. And then also, as you get older and people ask you to do things, recognize that sometimes something you're like, I don't really want to do that. You might have a colleague who would love to do it. And so you're actually being generous by saying, I really don't want to give a talk on that. I'm not able to come that date, but here's my colleague who that's her research interest. And she'd be great. And then she's delighted, and she gives a good talk, and you're delighted because you're not going to have to put together a PowerPoint about something that doesn't really interest you. So I think learning to, and saying no is, when we've told you take opportunities, and then we're telling you not to do things. So it's a little bit confusing, but not easy. And I love that you use the past tense as though we've figured it out. But I love that this question makes it sound like we got it.
So I was actually wondering, how do you guys manage your nervousness? You must present a lot to your colleagues, and I was wondering, how do you keep yourself from getting nervous when you're presenting and botching the entire thing?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I can take that one. I had trouble with public speaking early on, and then what you find is you get pushed into situations, and you just kind of have to suck it up and just do it. And the first time is really hard, The second time it gets a little bit easier. And then the third time you start to feel more comfortable with it. Everyone has their own comfort level. So some people, even when they're, when they have gray hair, they're still not so excited about public speaking. I'm personally speaking, I feel like I grew into it. I didn't start out that way, but now I feel, because I've just done it so many times, and I've challenged myself to really stretch myself when I do have the opportunities to speak. It becomes second nature, and once you've gotten to that comfort level, then you realize you can actually have fun with it and do things and try to entertain people rather than just, in a monotone, say what it is that you have to say.
On the next slide.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the times I've had to do public speaking, it's because I'm trying to share something I'm working on. And generally it's something I'm so interested in. The more passionate you are about something, at least for me, the more I want to share it with others. And so a lot of times speaking just became, here, let me tell you this really cool thing. And I just sort of ignore the fact that there's an audience in front of me. I'm just explaining something really, really cool to these people. And I just kind of have fun with it. So to each his own.
And I think the other thing I've come to appreciate is that, we all have different strengths. And one of my collaborators, who's a fantastic researcher who runs a lab, she and I have several grants together. She can run the lab, and there are 82 tubes that get drawn and processed and spun for the experiment, and she can get that all in order and make it happen. And I would I start to get shaky just thinking about the 82 tubes, much less knowing what's supposed to go in them. But she doesn't like speaking. So I travel a lot and give talks, and then I get paid honoraria that then we use to fund pilot studies. And she runs the lab and gets the research done, and together we're able to accomplish much more than we could on our own. So at 13, I wouldn't say I'm not going to be a speaker, I'm going to be a grant writer. But I think that as you mature in your career, the secret to success is not to be perfect at everything. It's to know what you're great at and then find someone else who's great at the other stuff and work together. Because then you can really get stuff done. Because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And it took me a long time to get to that. I was like, I must be good at everything. I must know how to do the tubes. And then I was like, wait, I hate the tubes. And then when I was able to recognize that the universe is better served when the things I hate to do are not what I spend most of my time doing. And I'm also better served, by the way. It gets much better. I think it's both exciting and terrifying that you may never know exactly what you want to be when you grow up. You're going to be what you are right now, and then you're going to figure out what you want to be next, and then see where it goes from there. And I don't think many people say when they're 20, like, when I'm 57, I will be, this. And then, because stuff happens, and you miss something if you're going in a straight line without looking. So.
Yeah.